They say Kingseat Hospital was built to house the forgotten, not just the mentally ill, but the inconvenient, the ones who didn't fit. And there's a room there, one they don't talk about, a room that was never on the blueprints. The nurses used to call it the White Room. They say it wasn't for patients. It was for containment. Kingseat was officially shut down in 1999. After decades of controversy, abuse, allegations, and inexplicable deaths. But the building remains, looming, cold, rotting slowly in the damp air just outside of Auckland. The government never bothered to tear it down. Maybe they were afraid of what they'd find behind the walls. In 2004, a local group of paranormal investigators, all in their 20s, decided to spend a night inside. They called themselves Spectre Seekers NZ, and they weren't serious ghost hunters, just curious young adults with cheap camcorders, walkie-talkies, and a hunger for something thrilling. The group consisted of 5 people: Lewis, Craig, Amanda, Cheryl, and Matu. What happened that night changed everything, and one of them never came back. The footage was never released publicly, but I've seen it. My cousin worked with the local authorities back then, and he was tasked with reviewing it after the incident. He said watching it made him feel physically sick, like something was watching him from the corner of the room every time he hit play. The tape starts off predictably. Nervous laughter, jokes about ghosts, someone pretending to scream in mock terror. They're making their way through the long abandoned wings, their footsteps crunching over broken tiles and shattered glass. The windows are boarded up. There's graffiti everywhere. Everything feels like a teenage cliché. But as they move deeper into the east wing, the air shifts. You can hear it on the tape. The group's banter dies down. Amanda says something about feeling watched. Lewis jokes that she's just spooked by mold. But there's something else, a kind of static in the background. Not on the tape, in the actual air. Like, the silence is too thick. About 30 minutes in, Lewis separates from the group. The camera he's holding starts to shake more. He says he heard something, a voice. It's faint, but audible if you listen closely, a soft, rhythmic sobbing, like a man crying. The others follow, calling for him. The footage cuts in and out, almost like the air itself is interfering with the device. And then they find it. A white door, no handle, no sign, no markings at all. Just a plain, peeling white door at the end of a corridor that shouldn't exist. Even the tiles change from moldy gray to sterile white linoleum, like something out of a surgical suite. The door is ajar, and Lewis goes in. At first, the others hesitate. Cheryl keeps saying, "This wasn't here before. I swear to God, this wasn't here." But they follow. The camera goes black. That was the last recorded footage. They emerged minutes later, hysterical, but Lewis was gone. The police searched for him for 2 weeks. Dogs, thermal imaging, full sweeps of the property. Nothing. It was like he had simply vanished from the earth. Craig was the first to break. He told police that when they stepped inside the white room, the temperature dropped instantly. A few degrees, it felt like stepping into an ice chest. And the room itself wasn't normal. He said it was bigger on the inside. Vast, a chamber of peeling walls and flickering lights. And on the far end, a chair bolted to the floor with restraints. Heavy ones. Bloodstains on the floor. Strange symbols carved into the walls, like someone had scratched them in with their fingernails. And Lewis was just gone. They never saw him again. Over the years, the story mutated. Locals say if you go near the old East Wing, you can hear that same sobbing, soft, like someone crying into their hands. A few claim to have seen a man's silhouette in the third-floor window, mouth open like he's begging to be let out. But the scariest part isn't what happened that night. It's what happened after, in 2012. Part of Kingseat was converted into a haunted attraction called Spookers. Actors in lab coats and blood-splattered gowns roam the halls for tourists. Several workers have quit after reportedly hearing cries for help, and not from actors. One woman, Lisa, worked there for 6 weeks. One night during a storm, the power went out. She was walking through the east side, checking emergency lights, when she saw something down the hall. A man in a patient's gown, wet, dirty, staring straight ahead. She called out, thought maybe a guest had gotten lost, but the figure didn't move, didn't blink, and then it turned and opened its mouth like it was screaming, but no sound came out. Lisa swears she ran back, but when she turned around again, the figure was gone. Just wet footprints leading directly toward the white room. Except that door was nailed shut, 3-inch nails, multiple rows, and still, every few nights, they find it cracked open. What nobody talks about, what never made the papers, is that Lewis's family still receives phone calls. Every few months, no caller ID, no breathing, just that same faint sobbing on the other end. And then a click. There's a reason locals in Riyadh avoid the outer perimeter of Irqah Hospital, especially after sundown. Located near the desert's edge, the abandoned facility casts a long, jagged shadow across the sand, like the ribcage of something that died with secrets still inside. The building was shut down in the late 90s after a series of mysterious deaths among both patients and staff. Officially, the hospital suffered from structural instability, but anyone who lived nearby knew that was only part of the truth. My cousin Faisal was obsessed with urban exploring and filming horror content for his small YouTube channel. He'd heard rumors that in Irqah's pediatric ward, people still heard crying soft, high-pitched whimpers that echoed down empty halls with no child in sight. I told him to stay away, but when you're young and foolish and chasing views, warnings feel like dares. So, one weekend in July, he convinced me to go with him. We arrived just after 11 p.m. The air was dry and still, though the sky churned with clouds like something was waiting. The hospital stood like a forgotten corpse in the desert, its walls scorched with heat and time, windows broken, vines clawing through cracks in the foundation. We slipped through a rusted side entrance, our footsteps crunching over scattered glass and medical debris. The smell was the first thing that hit me, musty, metallic, like blood and iodine left to rot. Faisal's flashlight caught faded Arabic lettering that once read Pediatric Intensive Care. He grinned and nodded, already filming. I kept close behind him, every part of me wanting to turn back. The halls were narrow and suffocating. Peeling paint curled like burned skin along the walls. On one door, a child's drawing of a sun and flowers still clung to the surface. The crayon, nearly dissolved by decades of heat. The deeper we went, the colder it got. I could feel a strange pressure in the air, like the building was sinking into itself, like we weren't supposed to be there. And then we heard it, a soft giggle. It came from somewhere to our right. Inside, a collapsed room filled with rusted bed frames. At first, I thought it was a recording, maybe some local kids playing a prank, but the sound was off. It was layered, one giggle followed by another and another, overlapping like echoes from different timelines. Faisal was shaking with excitement. "This is gold, man," he whispered, angling his camera toward the noise. I reached for his arm, but he was already walking forward, disappearing into the dim room. I followed, reluctantly. The room was colder than the others, and something wasn't right with the shadows. They moved independently of us, slow and fluid, like they were watching. I saw one of the beds slightly rocking, though there was no wind, no vibration. Just the faint sound of tiny breathing. "Look," Faisal whispered sharply. Pointing to the far wall, there was a small child's handprint smeared in what looked like dried blood. Right next to it, another. but they were too high, unnaturally spaced. Like someone had pressed themselves against the wall from above. Then came the whispering. It started softly, a hush-hush murmur from somewhere behind us. Then it multiplied, bouncing from wall to wall. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like pleading. Then crying. Dozens of voices rising in volume, then abruptly cutting off. Like someone had pulled the plug on a speaker. We bolted as we turned the corner into the hallway. All the emergency lights flickered on at once, even though the building had no power. Red pulses glowed down the corridor like heartbeat monitors, synchronized and slow. Every door along the hall creaked open, one by one. We didn't wait to see what would come out of them. We ran, stumbling over rusted gurneys and crumbling tile. But no matter how far we ran, the hallway never seemed to end. Every corner brought us back to the same broken vending machine, the same warped poster of wash your hands to stay healthy. It was like the hospital was looping on itself, trapping us inside some twisted memory. That's when I noticed Faisal had stopped. He was frozen in place. Eyes wide, camera dangling at his side. I turned to follow his gaze and saw the silhouette of a child standing at the end of the hall. The figure was barely visible, lit only by the dim red emergency lights. It looked like a girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with long tangled hair and a hospital gown that fluttered without wind. Her head tilted slowly. Then she took a step forward. I called Faisal's name, but he didn't respond. In place, breathing heavy, almost hyperventilating. I yanked his arm and we turned, this time for the main stairwell. We ran down 3 flights and burst out through the basement, pushing through an emergency door that somehow wasn't locked. Outside, the wind had picked up. The desert air burned hot again. We collapsed beside the car, shaking, drenched in sweat. Faisal didn't speak for the rest of the night. His footage stayed. The entire memory card was blank, except for one frame, the hallway, dimly lit, and that little girl, now just inches from the camera, her mouth open as if screaming silently. He deleted his channel the next day. That was 5 years ago. Irqah Hospital still stands. And even now, locals say if you walk past the pediatric wing, late at night can hear giggling echo from the walls. And sometimes, the sound of tiny footsteps following close behind. There's something unnerving about the way the wind moves through the ruins of Smime Sanatorium in Morocco. Locals claim it doesn't howl like a normal breeze. It whispers broken syllables that sound too human, too deliberate. The building itself is a long-forgotten relic tucked into the mountains outside Azru. once a tuberculosis hospital built by the French during colonial rule. Abandoned for decades, its crumbling structure stands surrounded by pine forest, devoured by moss and rot. But what keeps people away isn't the decay. It's the stories that cling to its walls. My name is Samir, and I work as a photojournalist. Based in Rabi, 2 years ago, I was on assignment in the Middle Atlas region, documenting rural communities when I first heard about Ben Smime. An old man I interviewed in a small village told me, almost casually, if you want to see where the dead walk, go to the sanatorium, but don't stay long. They notice you. He was joking, I thought. I laughed. He didn't. I couldn't get the name out of my head. That same night, I looked it up. There was almost nothing online. A few grainy photographs, mostly from urban explorers, and a handful of threads on paranormal forums. Stories of people hearing coughing echo through the empty halls, of lights appearing in windows where no electricity existed, of a woman in a hospital gown seen limping through the corridor, then vanishing into the wall. I was intrigued, more than intrigued. I made the decision to go. The road to the sanatorium twisted upward through dense pine forest. My rental car barely handled the dirt paths. It was near dusk when I arrived. The sun was slipping behind the hills, casting orange light over the cracked facade. The air felt thin, still. No birds, no insects, just silence. The main entrance was half-collapsed. I climbed through a broken window, my camera slung around my neck. Inside, everything was hushed. The scent of mildew was thick, clinging to the walls and floor. Peeling paint hung in sheets, revealing the skeletal bones of the structure. I started shooting photo sunlight through shattered glass, rusted bed frames, graffiti left by trespassers. The deeper I went, the darker it got. Something strange happened. I stepped into what must have once been the children's wing. The walls were painted in faded pastel colors, cartoonish flowers still visible in some places. Rows of small metal beds lined the walls, most missing mattresses, some burned, some twisted. As I moved through the room, the hairs on my neck rose. I felt like I was being watched. I paused, held my breath. I could hear it, barely audible, like distant, shallow breathing. At first, I thought it was my own, but it wasn't in rhythm with mine. I turned slowly. Flashlight cutting across the room. Nothing, but the breathing didn't stop. I backed out of the room, my camera forgotten around my neck. That's when I noticed a door that hadn't been there before. I swear it wasn't in the hallway when I entered. It was old metal, rusted, partially open. Beyond it was darkness. Something in me screamed to leave. But I didn't. I pushed the door open. It groaned like it hadn't been moved in years. The room beyond was pitch black. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside. The beam fell onto an old examination table, its surface blackened with age. Or something else. Beside it, a cabinet stood slightly ajar, surgical tools scattered across the floor beneath it. There were stains, rust, maybe blood. My breath fogged the air, though it wasn't cold. Then I heard the whisper, a single word, in French, rest. Stay. The voice was soft, feminine, but wrong. Like it wasn't coming from a person's mouth, but echoing through the air itself. I froze. Then I felt it, not heard. Felt, a hand cold, thin, touching the back of my neck. I spun around. Flashlight flying, nothing but my skin crawled. I knew I wasn't alone. I bolted, running blindly back through the corridors, stumbling over debris and broken furniture. The building groaned around me like it was alive, moaning in protest. As I reached the exit, I turned once more to look. Behind me, there was someone standing at the end of the hallway, tall, emaciated, dressed in rags of a hospital gown. Head tilted to one side, its face was blank, no features, just smooth, pale skin where eyes and a mouth should be. I ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car. Engine roaring, headlights cutting through the dark woods. I didn't sleep that night or the next. I deleted the photos, every single one, not out of fear, but because they were wrong, blurry when they shouldn't be. Faces that hadn't been there in the moment. A child peeking from behind a door. A silhouette staring from a window 5 stories up. Things I know I didn't see when I was shooting. It's been 2 years. I still dream of that place. I dream of that faceless figure, standing at the edge of my bed, watching, breathing, waiting for me to come back. Locals still won't go near. Ben Smime. They say the dead there never knew peace. That the sanatorium was a place of cruelty where colonial doctors tested unapproved treatments, where patients were left to rot, where children died alone in their beds. And if you listen closely, if the wind is just right, you'll hear them calling RESTE. But whatever you do, don't. The Irqah hospital, located on the edge of Riyadh, was once a symbol of modern medical advancement in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Opened in the 1980s, it boasted cutting-edge facilities and a dedicated staff. But by the late 1990s, it had inexplicably shut its doors. Since then, the abandoned hospital has become the focus of chilling tales whispered among locals. Tales of screams echoing through the empty halls. Shadowy figures glimpsed through shattered windows, and a sinister force that seems to linger long after the last patient left. My name is Kareem, and in 2014, I was a university student majoring in journalism. A friend of mine named Faisal was a videographer with a taste for urban exploration. He convinced me and two others, Sami and Nur, to accompany him on a late-night trip to Irqah Hospital to film a short documentary about haunted places. In Riyadh, I agreed, thinking it was nothing more than a spooky backdrop for a project. I was wrong. We arrived around 11 p.m. The hospital loomed like a crumbling beast in the moonlight. Rusted gates chained open, weeds creeping through the cracks of the pavement, and graffiti tagging the faded facade. Our voices echoed strangely in the silence as we passed through the main entrance. Inside, the air was thick and heavy with dust, decay, and something else, a feeling I can only describe as pressure, like we were being watched. Every footstep sounded too loud, paint peeled from the walls in long strips. Medical equipment, long since looted or left to rot, lay scattered like the remains of a battlefield. We made our way to the second floor, which reportedly had been the maternity ward. The stories said a woman died giving birth there during a power outage, and her child was stillborn. It said that her spirit never left that at night. The cries of an unseen infant can be heard echoing through the walls. Faisal set up his camera while the rest of us explored. I walked into a room that still had a rusted incubator in the corner. A black smear stretched from the foot of the bed to the door frame, as if something had been dragged. My flashlight flickered just for a second, and in that momentary lapse, I heard what sounded like a whisper behind me. I spun around, nothing, but my skin crawled. The air was freezing, and my breath had become visible, even though the rest of the hospital was hot and dry. Suddenly, Nur screamed from the hallway. We rushed out to find her standing pale, wide-eyed, and trembling. She said she saw a figure, a woman in a hospital gown, standing at the end of the corridor, her back turned far around and vanished. We were all shaken, but Faisal insisted we stay, said it could have been the wind or shadows playing tricks. We were here to document the haunting after all, so we pressed on, heading to the basement. That was our biggest mistake. The stairwell down was blocked by debris, but Sami found a service elevator shaft with its doors halfway open. We climbed down using the maintenance ladder bolted into the side. The air grew colder with every step. The basement was pitch black. Our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. The walls were covered in strange, charcoal-like scribbles. circles and lines that looked ritualistic. In the far corner, we found something that didn't make sense. A child's crib, untouched by dust, clean and pristine. There were no toys, no blankets, just a single white pillow with a faded pink stain in the center. Faisal approached it, filming. The camera light flickered violently, and then the crib began to rock slowly on its own. A low sound began to build in the room like a heartbeat thudding in the walls. Sami grabbed my arm. "We need to go." But then came the scream. It was shrill, unnatural. Neither male nor female. The walls shook. Our flashlight died. In that blind panic, we scrambled for the ladder. I remember climbing and feeling something grab my ankle. Cold, rough fingers, but when I kicked free and reached the second floor, there was no one behind me. Just darkness. We ran, stumbling over debris, gasping for breath. Nur was crying. Fazl dropped the camera in the rush and refused to go back for it. Outside, the desert air felt like salvation. We didn't speak until we were back on the highway, speeding away from the hospital. 2 days later, Faisal went back alone to retrieve his camera. He never found it, but he did find something else. His name scratched into a wall in the basement, with a date underneath, April 23rd, 2014. The exact day we had gone. He never showed us the picture, but I saw his hands trembling when he talked about it. Within weeks, we all began to experience strange phenomena. Sami claimed he heard screaming through the vents in his apartment at night. Nur developed insomnia and panic attacks. I kept seeing shadows in my rearview mirror that would vanish when I turned around. We stopped talking about Irqah Hospital. Faisal deleted the footage he had, refusing to edit the documentary. We were all changed. I don't know what's buried in the ruins of that hospital, but I know what we felt, what we heard. Something is still there, and it doesn't want to be forgotten.